And welcome in, everyone, to the Monday edition of Robby and Rexrode. I'm Joe Rexrode. Robby's out this week. We've got a legend in the studio with us, Mr. Mark. Yes, I'm looking at you, Mark Howard. I'm looking at you.
Good to be with you, Joe.
And we got a special show today. We're gonna talk Titans Bucks, of course, and break down the preseason game from Saturday night. Titans win 34-3. Super Bowl bound, presumably.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about Mike Vrabel, who, of course, yesterday told us that he is positive for COVID-19, and so that has, it seems to be healthy, but that has, of course, thrown things into another little bit of chaos over at St. Thomas.
It's thrown Tampa and the NFL into a panic because he was seen talking face-to-face with Tom Brady.
Right. Yeah. Yep. There's a lot of immediately, pictures being tweeted out of who he was close to. So we'll see, what else comes of that. But we're also, we're going to spend a lot of time today, Mark, talking about Floyd Reese, the former Titans GM. Very sad. He passed away over the weekend, age 73. Battled cancer for several months, and frankly, I can't think of many people better to speak on Floyd. What he meant in all his time here in Nashville than you. You were there. You were there the whole time. So I just want to start with that, Mark. What first of all, what came to mind Saturday, and what comes to mind for you when we talk about Floyd Reese?
Well, I couldn't think of a better person to cover when the NFL first came to town. Floyd was very generous in terms of sort of showing us the ropes. And, the great thing was, my favorite memories, as a lot of media people have, me, Jim Wyatt, Kuharski, Terry McCormick, people like that, standing watching practice. Floyd would come out, always gave you the morning bow. That was, and that's still really a greeting in the building at St. Thomas Sports Park. Kind of the old school people will give you the good morning bow, but teaching you, or at least educating you on roster building. Why he didn't want every receiver, for instance, to be the same. They had a really good core of receivers, whether it was Ike Bird, Chris Sanders, at the bottom of the rotation. And he would talk about his thoughts in how he wanted to put his team together. But, very engaging, but you crossed him, you heard about it. But still, through the years, a great guy to work with, had great stories, would give you the Bud Grant stories, some really funny ones about, he broke in with the Detroit Lions, and obviously went to Minnesota, and just the paths that he that he crossed through the years was fascinating. And then there was the whole thing with Jeff Fisher. The fact that he and Jeff did not see eye to eye, and that pretty much wasn't a secret. It wasn't like the Titans tried to bury it or did bury it. Everybody knew it existed. And there wasn't so much a Floyd camp and a Jeff camp, but that was kind of strange through the years. And now, to me, sadness that they were never able to mend fences. We can sit here and point the finger of blame at who didn't want to do it, but that's too bad, because they did too many good things together. You think about Jimmy Johnson being inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame, and talking about Jerry Jones, who he was estranged from for a long time. But in terms of Floyd, Joe, and I know you've heard this, and you got to know Floyd, of course, with him working here. He had no hobbies. It was football. He was a dedicated runner. He jogged every day. He was in phenomenal shape. But really, for Floyd, it was football, it was family, it was running, and that was pretty much it. Didn't have a boat. Wasn't a big guy about vacations or anything like that. This was his life's love. He was passionate about this. Spent a lot of hours at the office, But you think about his contribution to this city, coming in, first year of the new stadium, taking them to the Super Bowl, and the Titans having that extended run, one Super Bowl, 2 conference championships. They were perennial contenders, for a pretty good amount of time here, and just Floyd being engaging, selling the team, selling the NFL in this city, and just what he meant to Nashville. He loved the Titans, he loved Nashville, and he will always go down as one of the iconic figures, not only in the history of the franchise, but in the history of this city.
Yeah, you mentioned the Jeff Fisher thing. I mean, it's obviously very sad that Floyd will not be there. So we actually just found out over the weekend. It's going to be November 21st, so that's the Texans game. They're going to have Bum Phillips for the Colts game, and Jeff and Floyd for the Texans game. And it's very sad he won't be there, obviously, to enjoy it with his family. I'm glad he got to know this. I mean, I think that's huge that he found out last month the Titans announced it, told him, they had a comment from him about how much it means. So he knew it. His family obviously will be there, be bittersweet. But I'm with you. I mean, and you were here for that time period with him and Jeff Fisher. I mean, it's too bad that this many years later that couldn't have been mended.
Yeah, and Floyd was very stubborn. He was. And in a lot of situations, you crossed him, you were kind of dead to him. But the other thing about Floyd, you think about those 1998 and 1999 and even 2000 drafts. The 99 draft was huge. Javon Curse, fell to the Titans, and that turned out to be a phenomenal pick. But you look, who else, they got in that draft. John Thornton was a huge pick for them. The year before, they got Samari Roll, Derek Mason, Kevin Dyson. Even though he didn't have a huge career here, he was in the middle of some big moments. And had he not hurt his knee, we've always said, it would have been bigger. But the 99 draft produced 5 or 6 players that really contributed, to those teams in the next 3 or 4 years. So it was not insignificant. And you look, getting Derek Mason in the middle rounds and him, turning out to be one of the better receivers in the NFL for the next decade. And a guy like Joe Salavea, who was here for 4 or 5 years. Might have been a quote-unquote rotational player, but he was a good player. And for that Super Bowl team, picking up a guy like Jason Fisk, who turned out to be, a really good role player. Getting Craig Hentrick, a couple of years before, one of the better punters in the league. So you look around and obviously, Eddie George, even before that, and how – Eddie was another guy who fell pretty far in the first round of the draft. People wondered if he had the speed to be a good NFL running back, and as it turned out, he did just fine.
Yeah, he did okay. Well, yeah, I mean, 95 and 96, back-to-back. I mean, first-round picks, and that's, the foundation. I mean, those are still now, quarter century later. Iconic figures here and, foundational pieces for a Super Bowl run. And like you said, I mean, Samari Roll in 98, the 99 draft, I mean, a lot of players who meant a great deal. And then you go Bullock, in the first round in 2000. I mean, it's a heck of a run, and I mean, even like a Robert Smith, late in a draft, guys like that. And then some free agent
getting Vanden Bosch. Kyle Vanden Bosch had been drafted by Arizona, had a litany of knee injuries, and everybody felt like he was pretty much going to wash out of the league, and not only comes to the Titans, but becomes an every snap guy, which is pretty amazing, given his injury history. So that was one of the great free agent pickups. And we learned with Floyd, how difficult it was in that era to keep a team together with some of the guys they lost, because of the salary cap. The first significant loss was John Runyon off the Super Bowl team, a right tackle who had a terrific run with the Eagles, went to a Super Bowl with them, and that was hard. And then the pain of having to see Samari Rolle walk away, just to see Derek Mason walk away, and just a lot of good players, because Floyd had to make choices, and we went through that with him to try to keep the team competitive, and just learn that being a general manager in the NFL is a precarious existence.
No doubt. Well, Runyon, by the way, late fourth round pick in '96. I mean, again, a lot of value in these drafts. But that's one thing. Mike Vrabel, of course, John Robinson and Mike Vrabel both spoke after the game in Tampa, and that's one thing Vrabel brought up is, you don't see it too often when you have a GM of a pro team, and first of all, it basically inevitably goes bad at some point, right? In a salary cap league, I mean,
yeah.
At some point it's going to, it's a question whether you can survive the downs, if you have ups as a GM as he did. But like Vrabel said, you don't always see someone like that then sort of, it's part of the sports community in the town years later and celebrated here. And I just have to think, Mark, that has something to do, or maybe a lot to do, with just Floyd's personality. I'll tell you that the first time I met him, which would have been 5 years ago, I knew Floyd Reese as an NFL, someone who followed the NFL, and I couldn't believe how, kind and just unassuming he was as a person. And I understand that being in media is different than being in that job, but I feel like he maybe didn't exactly fit the mold of even though, like you said, he's a football guy, but he was a kind of a kinder, gentler football guy.
He wasn't one of these, and Bill Polian, can be engaging, but you could never get anything out of Bill Polian. He wouldn't tell you anything. Floyd would at least after the fact, give you some information, nothing that, was going to help you day to day, but he would give you great background. And he would tell you, and a lot of GMs don't do this, he would tell you about, I wanted X player in the third round, and I had to settle for Y. And that to me is always fascinating, and I'm sure to you, because the fortunes of a team can rise and fall, sometimes, on those middle rounds, and who you're focused on and don't get, and who you end up with. You go back to the 99 draft, but he not only got Curse in the first round and Thornton in the second, he got Zach Pillar in the third.
Right.
Zach was a staple on that offensive line for a few years. Donald Mitchell, who still might be the best slot corner that they've ever had since they've been here. The year before, he got Kevin Long in the seventh round, who was a starter for 4 years before he got injured and had to retire. So you're right. It does eventually go bad, but when Floyd was hot, he put together some really good drafts.
We're going to take a break here, Robby Rexrode. Just to let you know, we are going to have Corey Curtis, Jim Wyatt. We're going to have Blake Bedingfield on later. John Robinson's going to be on Darren Donick and Jason. And Jared's show, really special show today, all about Floyd, Stillman and Company. They're going to have Nick Saban will be on, Derek Mason, Chris Sanders, John Clayton, and more than that as well. So here we are in the Wholesaling Studios powered by Rumble.com. We'll be right back on Robby and Rexrode. I hate running the show. All right, so we'll probably talk some about this J-Rob stuff, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah.
Welcome back, Robby and Rexrode, here on 102.5 The Game. If you'd like to get involved in the discussion today, call or text the 102.5 The Game phone and text line driven by WilsonCountyHyundai.com. Talking about Floyd Reese, Joe Rexrode, Mark Howard here, Michelle Knezovic, intern Will, all in the studio here on a Monday morning. And Mark, when this came through Saturday, I actually found out via Jared Stillman's tweet about Floyd passing away. Was in Florida, was actually at my grandma's house in Venice, about to drive up to Tampa for the game, but sort of texting some people and texted John Robinson and said, hey, I know you're going to be in there tonight, but you got a few minutes. So got on the phone with him, and he told me a really interesting story that I had not heard, and he sort of gave a brief repeat of that story after the game. But I found it really interesting. This basically Floyd, of course, not a great ending, and usually GMs in professional sports don't have great endings. It really
never ends well. Yeah.
Like, when does it end well? Basically, if you retire and you have just been on a championship run, right? I mean, how often does that happen? What percentage? It's a very low percentage. But so you're talking, 10 years? Talking 10 years, apparently, Floyd had no contact with Steve Underwood and, various members of the organization called up. And now this is Steve Underwood, who at the time was president and CEO.
Understand, Steve Underwood was Bud Adams' consigliere. He was his hatchet man. So a lot of times Steve Underwood was the guy to deliver the bad news to, some of the executives and higher ups in the organization. I had not heard the story either, so please go on.
Yeah, so essentially after John had been hired, and of course Amy Adams-Strunk had recently been named controlling owner, which has turned out to be a fantastic move for this franchise. And this was really just the early stages of 2016, trying to basically start over and go in a different direction. So after John Robinson had been hired, he was director of player personnel with the Bucks. Underwood called him into his office and said, hey, I just want you to know, I haven't talked to Floyd in a decade, basically, and he called me on your behalf and was effusive on his behalf, essentially. So, and that's, I think that's, again, getting John on the phone, and then, of course, that's what he talked about at the press conference. Obviously, that's foremost in his mind. Like, think about that. A guy who, there's a lot of hard feelings when things end like they do here, but to go out of his way to try to get John the job. And I think it also speaks to, I wrote a little bit about this at The Athletic, but it speaks a little bit to how obviously they were friends. They worked together with the Patriots, John Robinson and Floyd Reese, but also like-minded. And I feel like Floyd has looked like at the past few years like, this is kind of how I would go about it. This is my kind of team that John Robinson is building. It's
a great story. It really is, and tells you all you need to know about Floyd and his belief that in this league it's a meritocracy, whether we're talking about players, whether we're talking about coaches or even executives. And he felt like John Robinson would be a great fit here. And you're right. He put aside, some bad feelings and called on John's behalf. And I thought that was just phenomenal. I really did. And you're right. I think, when you look at John, you see a lot of the same characteristics as you did in Floyd, all the way down to the jogging, part around the perimeter of the practice field or whatever. But, you're right. They were together at New England, and, he knew John pretty well. And I know that, when Floyd passed away on Saturday, a lot of people, I don't think, totally understood what a great resource John would have been for a story about Floyd Reese, because he knew him so well. But I don't think a lot of people totally knew the connection.
Yeah. Well, another thing John told me was he's like, my phone, it's been constant, with people from around the league. That's another thing that, maybe I didn't quite comprehend either, is like the importance of Floyd and the feeling for him around the league. Even like my coworker and I say in air quotes, Dan Pompei, who's been such a great NFL writer for so long, he tweeted out that column about Floyd, and it was like, about a guy who, has touched a lot of us in the league. And I'm like, God, I never would have necessarily made the connection that like Dan Pompei or somebody would know Floyd Reese well. But, when you're in this league for that long and you treat people the way he did, that makes an impact. But it is interesting thinking about sort of this team or the organization as it is now as kind of hearkening back to Floyd's era. Because first of all, I don't think there's any GM out there who says, I want a team that's really white collar and just skill but no toughness and guys who don't get along, right? I mean, everybody has the same general idea about building a team, but I do feel like some GMs, you emphasize some things more than others. And I'd like to know if you buy into that, I guess, that the intangibles and just sort of the, I guess, old school football is a big part of why Floyd was successful. And it was different back then, but I mean, and if you think that John has some of that now.
Well, absolutely. And, we look at John, again, John has done a really good job bringing in, street free agents, to augment the roster. And you look how many guys that he's brought in, undrafted or journeymen around the league that he didn't pay a lot of money for, but have made contributions to this franchise. Another guy was Drew Bennett. Drew Bennett came in here undrafted, a guy who was primarily a quarterback at UCLA. And again, Floyd was a scouting animal. He came into the NFL as a strength coach, but he was, a great personnel guy. And, you look back and you understand how Super Bowl teams, how successful teams are built. And, again, Floyd hitting on the middle rounds of the draft. You go back to 98. He not only got, Kevin Dyson at number one, who, again, didn't put up huge numbers, but Samari Roll, a terrific player in the second round. Danon Sidney, who was a sometime starter at cornerback, who contributed to this team for 4 or 5 years. And then in the fourth round, as I mentioned, you got Joe Salavea. Fifth round, you got Benji Olsen, who was a fixture at guard for a decade in the fifth round out of Washington. And then later on, he got, Kevin Long, who turned out to be an undersized but really effective starting center. And when you have a couple of drafts like that, it really improves your roster. And the Titans were a perennial stuck at 8-8 franchise. And I thought the 98 and 99 drafts really put them over the top. It was going into the 99 season. They had the sword of Damocles hanging over their heads. Playoffs or pink slips.
I was just going to bring that up.
And Floyd and even Jeff really embraced that. And that, they certainly got to the playoffs. They got all the way to the Super Bowl. Remember seeing Floyd on the field in Jacksonville when the Titans won the AFC Championship, beating a really good Jags team who didn't lose to anybody that year except the Titans 3 times. But the Titans routed them in Jacksonville, and the Titans went to their first and, as it turns out, their only Super Bowl. And, just seeing Floyd and seeing Bud and, what that meant to both of them and to the franchise.
Yeah, I mean, as a general NFL fan, I remember that day. Like, okay, the Jags are going to just take it out on the Titans for those two, right? I mean, there's no way they're losing a third time, and they'll probably win handily. And then you're just like, wow, just so impressive. A few years ago.
Well, by the way, in that game, so you want to talk about a Floyd Reese game? The big turnaround in that game was keyed by a sack for a safety of Mark Brunell by Josh Evans, who was an undrafted free agent pickup, who was a dominating player for like 3 years and, couldn't get past the weed thing, which at the time, was really, a huge thing in the NFL. And then on the ensuing free kick, Derek Mason,
right,
who was a middle round pick in 97, taking it to the house and really broke the game open. So there were a lot of components in that game, and you think about Frank Wycheck, my former radio partner, who was a guy that Floyd picked up off of waivers after the Redskins cut him, and Frank had a terrific run for almost a decade with the Titans. So you think about all of that, and those are all Floyd Reese pickups.
If you want to get in the discussion, remembering Floyd Reese, give us a call, give us a text. The phone and text line driven by WilsonCountyHyundai.com, 615-737-1025. We come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about Floyd in the context of Nashville and people who have kind of helped Nashville become the sports city it is today. Here on Robby and Rexrode, Joe Rexrode, Mark Howard, Michelle Knezevic, intern Will. Sorry, Michelle. We'll be right back on Robby and Rexrode.